This is a production of Off the Hook Sports with Dave Hooker.
A lot of you think about football season as starting and kickoff in August, late August, early September, maybe even fall camp, which now happens in late July. I go SEC spring meetings. To me, that's kind of like the fiscal year of when football gets started, and that's what they have going on in Destin. So we're going to talk to Chris Landry about this because I will tell you right now, this could be the most important spring meetings in the history of the SEC. So all the coaches and athletic directors are there. We'll get to some of the big topics. First, I want to remind you that we are brought to you by our friends at Owl's Nest Barbecue. And the Owl's Nest Barbecue is fantastic when it comes to barbecue supplies. And I saw recently where our good friend Steve was promoting some fantastic pellet grills that when you talk pellet grills, you talk about holding the temperature and the flavor, and you're golden. Kind of a set it and forget it, but you still get to go out there and look at the meat and test it with the temperature, with the thermometer. It's just fantastic grills. And trust me, I bought other grills in the past that were more expensive that I didn't get the quality out of. So you will. So again, go to Owl's Nest Barbecue. You're watching on their page, so it's very easy to find. And don't forget about our friend Steve Ray's Midnight Oil, a proud Michelin distributor that will take care of your car in any shape, form, or fashion. All right, Chris, this is the most important. I'm going to go ahead and argue this is the most important SEC spring meetings in the history of SEC spring meetings, and there's a couple of reasons why. But let me start with you just in terms of what are some changes? What are some things you're watching? Because you talk to coaches more often than I do. So, what do they care most about?
Well, um, coaches and administrators tend to think along different lines. So, having talking to administrators and coaches, sometimes it's a little different. But this year, this time, I think the first thing, and I don't think we're going to get it solved at the SEC meetings, is at least the SEC, being the leader of college football, is how do they view and what are their thoughts about the current world of NIL, the frustrated recruiting calendar, the transfer calendar, inconsistent NCAA enforcement, um, and the delay of the college football expansion. All of those things are not SEC issues, but are college football issues. And with SEC leading the parade, so to speak, I'm very curious to see what they think or at least what I hear that they are talking about. But again, we're not going to have everything. We're not going to really have anything definitive. But I do think being the leaders, it'll be interesting to see what their thoughts are. I think the most interesting thing that we could get some information on that I think we're going to be closer to the answer is scheduling in the SEC. How to move forward with how are you going to integrate Oklahoma and Texas? Because, 2025 is right around the corner. So are you going to 8-game schedule, 9-game schedule, pods, which I think we're going to be in pods. I keep getting people sending me, well, this ought to be in the East and it moved this in the West. I don't think we're going to be in divisions. I think we're going to be in pods. But again, we'll find out maybe this week, where things might be headed there.
Okay, let me stop you there. Describe for those that don't know what you mean by pods. It's kind of self-explanatory,
Yeah.
but if you pick how would they divvy up?
Well, I don't know. That's what's going to be interesting. The way they would put it into pods is you'd play everybody in a little smaller division, a group. You play everybody, but then you would, within a 2-year period, every school would play every other school in the SEC. We're getting to the point now where you may have a school not play another school for 8 or 9 years, which is kind of foolish. It's like you're not even in the same league. And that's the byproduct of the conferences getting so big. So I think what we're going to see is putting them in pods, which again, people are going to have to get used of it. And it really would depend, Dave, on whether it's an 8-game or a 9-game conference schedule. With that's going to determine it. And I don't know who they're going to put where, and because they're going to certainly get input from everybody, including Oklahoma and Texas. At least get some information what their likes and dislikes would be, and try to make it to where again you'd play everybody, including you'd have a different situation. The other thing it would do potentially, and I'm curious, is we got a good situation right now that flows well in the SEC. You got a dominant Georgia and a dominant Alabama, East and West. It makes sense. Go chase them big boys and see what happens. But one of the things I think they'd look at is, what if you had a situation where the two best teams were in the same division? We see that in other conferences, and we're seeing other conferences going away from, you know what, let's try to figure out if we can have more creative scheduling and pin the two best teams in the league at the end of the year as opposed to the best in the East, the best in the West, because even if they played each other in the year. So I think those decisions, yay or nay, agree or disagree, are things that are going to be the most interesting, that I would hope we'd go further down the road on getting answers to, as opposed to the former.
If you're Tennessee, this is a bit of a touchy subject. Again, Chalk Talk brought to you by Owl's Nest Barbecue. And with Owl's Nest Barbecue, again, check out their Green Mountain Grills. They've got the Daniel Boone edition, the Davy Crockett edition, the Jim Bowie edition, and they're absolutely phenomenal. Don't forget about the rubs. They've got your complete supplies right there in Ooltewah, and Steve Raceman Not Oil will take care of your vehicle. But I do want to turn to what Tennessee is hoping for at the end of the day, because you mentioned an 8 or 9 team schedule. I can't believe I'm saying this because I'm a traditionalist and I love the Tennessee-Alabama game, but there is at least a chance that annual rivalry, like Georgia-Auburn, could go away, right? Can you talk about the pros and cons from Tennessee?
Well, I think they're going to do their best to keep as many of those together. It does get complicated. I again, I think it depends on what area you're from. To me, I mean, you go back into certainly in the Coach Bryant era, and certainly when Coach Nealon was there. That was Alabama's biggest rival, not Auburn. It was, so I think losing that. Now, I know it's not much of a rivalry now. It's bigger for Tennessee, but Alabama is just another game. I mean, they're kind of on a different level. But I think, to me, I wouldn't want to make decisions that are short-sighted, because we're going to turn around in several years and we don't know who's going to replace Nick Saban and what the future is. So I'd hope we'd look at things and try to preserve it. You may not be able to preserve all of it, but I do think that you need to look at the biggest rivalry games and try to keep them as much as possible. There's always been the talk, for example, if you kept it in divisions, we'll move Auburn in the East, but make sure that Auburn and Alabama stay every year. And then you move, you could move Missouri to the West, and but you also get into situations where you can look competitively, and you say, well, this is weaker, and it's more in other conferences, quite frankly, than the SEC. But one of the things that it is impossible to forecast is, as you get bigger and bigger conferences, you're going to have the top shelf, the next level contenders, and you're going to have your bottom, but they're not going to stay the same. I know there's some schools that may always be at the bottom, but so you can't. I think you have to look long term, and I think they're looking at the pods as a way to keep the best rivalries together, but make sure that, competitively speaking, you get to play everybody to where it's a more of a true feel for who is the best teams in your conference. And again, not as big of a deal in the SEC as it is in other leagues, but I know the Pac-12's looking at it, And I think others are going to look at it as these conferences have gotten bigger and bigger. And I think when you're talking about adding Oklahoma and Texas, it's going to only make this more of an issue to where, you're going to have really problems trying to figure out. And I think you're going to need to make sure that you get a better sample size of teams good playing good and everybody playing, more good teams on a yearly and a every other year rotational level.
So at the end of the day, if you had to bet that big Chris Landry paycheck for a week, will the Tennessee-Alabama series remain intact once Texas and Oklahoma are in the conference?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. So I wouldn't bet, much of anything. But I would say that there's still a pretty good chance because I think of the way the pods could be set up. I think that could be one that could be salvaged. So, and I do think that Alabama is going to want to keep that. I think Tennessee does, and Alabama has a lot of stroke. So it's one of those things. It's kind of like NFL scheduling. I don't know if people know this, but obviously that's more clear cut. But everybody kind of submits their preferences, and then you do the best to accommodate. And this is what it's going to be like. We're going to tell us what your likes and dislikes are, everybody. And we're going to try to do our best, but understand that we're going to come to we can't please everybody in every situation. And I think this is going to be one that both sides are going to push to keep, and we're just going to see if it's going to be doable or not. I believe that if there's any way they can, they will keep it. That's my sense. But if you're talking about that versus Auburn, Alabama, if it comes down between either or, then no, it wouldn't. But I don't know that that's going to necessarily come down to that.
Again, brought to you by our friends at Owl's Nest Barbecue. Owl's Nest Barbecue. It's on my list, my I gotta get list. The Green Mountain Grill. I think I'm gonna go with the Davy Crockett edition. But I'll tell you the great part about going to Owl's Nest is you get the insight, you get the community, and be a part of their community. Like their page, and be sure and like their community. Join their community. It's been so cool to see the different people post their foods and what they're doing on their smokers, and it's a really neat thing right there in Ottawa. And Owl's Nest Barbecue is a great part about them. An easy drive from Chattanooga or from Knoxville. But that Green Mountain Grill is changing the game. He is Chris Landry. I'm Dave Hooker. We will talk to you next week. A presentation with Chris and Dave of Off the Hook Sports with Dave Hooker.